Hello to all my fellow quilters and fellow long armers. Welcome back to KK's Quilt Studio. A question was posed a week or two ago about how to stitch out an edge-to-edge design on a Christmas tree skirt. Now, she wasn't specific about what shape the skirt was in, if it was just a circular skirt or if it had sides. So in this thought process, I thought it would be interesting to create something, a polygon shape that was different. And this one had 12 sides. I learned also that a 12-sided polygon is actually called a dodecagon. So I learned something new there. So how did I create that dodecagon shape? Well, being an art and stitch instructor, certified teacher, I of course went into art and stitch and created that 12-sided polygon shape, that dodecagon, and then I saved it into format. I saved it in HQF. You would save it in the format that your machine stitches out in, and then I saved it and took it over into ProStitcher to open up as a design file. So here we are with a fresh workspace loaded up on my ProStitcher Premium. I'll go over here to move the head of my machine out of the way. Let's go to the File tab. I'll open up the design, and here is my skirt outline. The first thing I want to do, of course, when setting up any edge-to-edge design, you would establish an area. So I click on my area tab. I thought the most simple way would be to use my rubber band area. Of course, you can use your multi-point, but clicking on that rubber band, voila, one click, and I've got my rubber band, actually a nice tight circumference around my shape, my dodecagon, and I'm ready to go back to the file and bring up a Christmas design. The Christmas lights look like a fun design to play with, and then I would go to the repeat tab, and I repeated this 4 times. Of course, I've got my red and green start and stop points, so I'd want to hit on the point to point so that it continues in one smooth pass. I'll go to vertical and repeat the design 4 times. I want to close that gap, of course, between the rows. So I'll go ahead and click, and that looks pretty good. Go back to select. Remember, I'm working in the simulator, so I can left click, drag that design over my dodecagon area. Let's center that and bring it into position. The next thing I would do is go to modify and to crop, and I would go ahead and click on, I want to crop everything outside. I want to get rid of all those red and green starts and stops along the edge. But notice something that happened. Remember, I had a black dot here so that this would continuously sew. Now my black dots have reverted back to actual red and green dots. So from experience in sewing out something like this, when it reverts back to a red and green dot, it's not necessarily a start and stop with tie-offs, tie-ons. It actually is where my machine would pause or hesitate slightly before continuing on to the next repeat of that design. I don't really want that. I want it to sew out the complete row. You'll also note that my starting point is up here, my stopping point is down here. I don't have stopping points at the edge of that last row. Why it does this, I don't know. Normally when you do an edge to edge, it would stop at that first row pass, give you a pause for a long jump, and you would do your tie-offs or cut your threads, return the machine to the left, and would stitch out the next row. I can tell you that this is not going to do that. I did the simulator sew out, and actually this design would keep on sewing all the way down in one continuous sew out. I set my design size for 30 inches. This is not going to work because I don't know of a machine that has a 30-inch frame gappage from top to bottom. The opening on our machine, on our frames, is not big enough without bumping up against our frame. So it's going to sew out this first row and then continue to sew out the second row, and somewhere along the way, at least on my machine, it's going to bump up against the frame. So this way of setting it up is not going to work. It's not going to work for my design. I don't have a machine that's big enough to sew out this complete 30-inch width, and I doubt that you do either. So let's go back to the drawing board. Let's clear that and start again. This time we'll open back up that skirt outline again. You'll notice that I've set the size to about 30 inches tall, 30 inches wide. It's a good size, so you could set whatever size skirt that you have. We're going to go back to area, hit the rubber band, and open that file, open the design file again, Christmas lights. Let's set up our repeat again, back to horizontal, 4, point to point, vertical, 4, narrow up the gap. So you might think, well, the reason you may have got that is because you may have not baselined. So this time when we set that up, let's baseline. Okay, looks good. I've got my start and my stop, but I also have a red dot that is signifying that my machine is going to stitch out this first row, stop to pause for a long jump, signified by that dotted line. So that looks good. That looks like it might work. Let's go to modify again to crop. Let's click on those edges because we don't want all those start and stops along the edge of our outline, and then click outside to crop out. And you'll see what happened. Again, I did not get, I've lost my long jump pauses. Again, it's going to start up here, stop down here. This way still isn't going to work. I did baseline, thought that might help, but again, it's not going to work. So let's go back to our repeat area, back to where we started, and maybe this, I don't know why ProStitcher wants to do that. Maybe it's the shape of the area of the tree skirt that we have that's causing it to lose these long jump pauses, or maybe it's the design. I don't know, but let's try something different. Let's go back to setting up that area. Let's go back to selecting that area, and you can either select on it. What we want to do is just select that area until you see now that it's purple. We want to know that our area is selected. It turns blue, and that edge to edge design grays out. So now we know that we have the area selected. We're going to clear that area, and this time we're going to use our multi-point to set up that area. So I'll go back to Simulate, grab my machine head, and I'm going to want to go down to a point on that area where I have at least the first row stitching out. So I'll go to multi-point, and click. I said, establishing this area with multi-point is going to take a lot of clicks, and indeed it does. So I'm going around my design, around my skirt, establishing the corners and setting up where I want this design to crop out. The reason I'm going below this line because I want to capture that entire row stitch out, and I need to go a little bit below in order to get that whole area to stitch out. Okay, now let's go to modify. I need to go back to select my design, and let's crop. Do my edges and crop outside that design. Well, I get the starting point and the long jump pause, and you'll see that that second row though is actually included. So that's probably not the best situation. I'd have to go back and keep resetting this. So there's got to be an easier way. So this cropping out individual rows, probably it could work, it could do okay, but there's probably really a better way to do it. So let's go back and let's clear all again. Let's start again. So I use the things that I've learned so far in order to set up what is the last and what I think the most successful way to handle this design. So go back to design, and load that skirt, and load the Christmas lights edge to edge. And this time what I want to do is isolate the rows. So when I go to repeat the designs this time, I'm going to do 4 repeats, do my point to point, and I'm then going to baseline. So I will drag that design. Let's center everything. Drag my design back in. And again, like I said, I'm wanting to isolate the rows. So I have 1 row and I know I need 4. So I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to duplicate that row. It's placed it up here. So I'll drag it down. And I'm holding my mouse key, click on the left, keep holding it down, and when I release it, sets the design. That's drag and drop. If you're not good at this, you can always go to modify to reposition and use your nudge tool. You can set it defaults to 0.01. You can always change that nudge factor to say like a 0.2. I like that. And then nudge it left or right, up or down, and into position. That looks even better. So I'll stay with that. So again, I'm going to go back to edit, and I will duplicate again that design, drag it down into position, and I'll do that for 4 repeats. That one looks a little close, so we'll nudge it down a little bit. Okay, and again, duplicate it one last time for our 4th row. Drag that down into position. Holding my left click key and dragging into position, release the key and it drops. Okay, so let's back out, take a look at our design. That looks pretty good. So now what I have done is established 4 independent rows, and they will stitch from the green starting point to the red stopping point. So at this point in time, I need to crop out. I'll need to go back to my skirt design. I have it selected because now it is dark. My edge design is grayed out, so that signifies that I have it back on my work table. I can establish that rubber band area. So now I have an area that I can go back and crop my individual rows. Go to Modify and Crop. Click my edges. Click Outside. Repeat. Edges, outside. Repeat. Edges, outside. Edges, outside. Now I have 4 independent rows that will stitch out independently of each other. So if I select on that first row, go to ProStitcher, I can click Run, and it will only stitch from here to here. So it will actually stop. You can pause. It's going to end your ProStitcher sew out, so only do 1 row at a time. I would stop here, tie off, cut my threads, whichever method you like to end your rows at, and then I would highlight or select my second row, move my machine, go back to simulate. I'd move my machine head, and this is before I advance my quilt, move my machine head back into position, mark this, either drop a needle so that when you advance your quilt, you're marked to stop. You can use the blue tape method or whatever your favorite way of marking your second row before you advance your quilt. So now I'm at that starting point. I'm ready to go back to ProStitcher, run, and stitch out my second row. Now you can try this in Simulator, see that it works. It's only going to sew on the row, the edge-to-edge repeat that is highlighted. You'll see again that these other 3 rows are grayed out. They will not stitch. You're only going to stitch the highlighted design in one pass of your ProStitcher. So you can have multiple repeats here, but you're only going to stitch the one that's highlighted. So I hope you've enjoyed today's explanation, the thought process that I kind of went through to figure out how we can stitch an odd-shaped quilt or quilting design with an edge-to-edge. It's not normally what you would find with a square or rectangular quilt that we're usually dealing with. I don't know if that's the way ProStitcher behaves when we are trying to put an edge-to-edge in an odd shape like this dodecagon, but I encourage you to play around. I enjoyed playing with this design and figuring out how we could successfully stitch an edge-to-edge design on a dodecagon quilt skirt. If you'd like to save this workspace, go back to the File tab and Save, and we want to save the workspace. That will save your shape, your area, and the setup for the edge-to-edge repeats. So just click on Workspace, and then I set it up. I called it tree skirt. So you would just type in down here tree skirt HQWA. That means it's saving a workspace area. Click save, and so then you will be able to bring this back up. I'll go ahead and say yes, and you'll be able to bring this back up in your machine, and you're ready to start quilting your Christmas tree quilt skirt. If you have any other questions or problems you want me to do a YouTube video on, or maybe even a class, you can contact me through any of the social media platforms. You can join our digital quilting bee at groups.io. It's sort of like the Yahoo groups. We discuss all things digital and quilting. It's sort of like a old message board format if you don't have Facebook. If you do belong to Facebook, I have a group called Art and Stitch ProStitcher Digital Quilting Views. Be sure to click on it and ask to join. Also, any other YouTube videos here at my channel, remember to click down below, click subscribe, click the little bell if you'd like to be alerted anytime I post any new videos. You can contact me through my website or by email at kksews@kksquiltstudio.com. Let me know your difficult quilting situation. I hope you've enjoyed today's dilemma, and you'll come back and join us again. Until then, I wish you happy quilting.